Welcome to Revolutionize Your Retirement Radio, bringing you insights and strategies to help you create a magnificent and fulfilling second half of life. Here's your host, certified professional retirement coach and best-selling author, Dr. Dorian Mintzer.
I want to welcome everybody to my fourth Tuesday Revolutionize Your Retirement Interview with Expert series. I'm Dorian Mintzer, owner of Revolutionize Retirement and your host for the series. I am delighted to introduce our two guests, Szifra Birk and Jay Livingston, a wonderful dynamic duo. I'm going to tell you a little about them, and then we'll talk about this book that they wrote called In Tandem, Pedaling Through Midlife on a Bicycle Built for Two. So Szifra is an executive leadership coach and the country's first financial behavioral specialist. For her groundbreaking work with financial professionals and their clients, she's appeared in Business Week, in addition to various industry publications such as Investment News. In her first career, she co-authored Together We Heal, a book about psychotherapy for adults with parental alcoholism. And then she co-authored with her husband, Jay Livingston, In Tandem, Pedaling Through Midlife on a Bicycle Built for Two. Jay Livingston is retired from an eclectic career as an executive coach, a prize-winning antique boat restorer, a renowned dog behaviorist, and a director of development for a Harvard hospital. He's the author of Simple Steps to Change Your Business and Your Life. His dozen other vocations and avocations are a case study in excellence run amok. He's appeared on Nova, and in the 70s, an automotive garage he managed was recognized by Ralph Nader. So they're very much a dynamic duo. I should note that I met Szifra a number of years ago. I don't even remember how long ago, because we both have this interest in money and financial literacy and women and money, couples and money. And she definitely has done some really groundbreaking work with financial professionals. And I think that I've met Jay once. At one point when I think I was out in Chelmsford. I have this vague memory. It was a long while ago. And I do want to comment, I've both read as well as listened to their really wonderful book. It's a gem of a book. I think it's about, although it says pedaling through midlife, I think it could be a book for couples at any stage of their relationship, because it's really this wonderful metaphor of riding on a bicycle built for two and dealing with your relationship. And Jay reads the book on Audible, so I heartily recommend it. So without further ado, welcome to both of you. And how did you come up? I'm going to sometimes direct a question to one or the other of you, or jump in or whatever. But how did you come up with writing this book?
This is Szifra, and I'm gonna take this one. We came up with writing a book when, after several tandem rides, which, by the way, didn't start until my 60th birthday. I'm 74 now, so we've been at this a while. But in the first several rides, I would keep thinking of these metaphors as we were riding the bike. For example, we would be riding along, it was smooth, it was beautiful, and then there would be sand or a pothole or something else unexpected. And all of a sudden I would be, Jay, this is like a metaphor for a relationship. You know how things go really smoothly, then all of a sudden someone makes a face or does a tone of voice, and the conversation starts getting off, and you have to maneuver, and you're suddenly not as comfortable.
Just to be clear, Szifra's talking about other people's relationships. Ours is always
always perfect. This one is not, which you could read in the book since you've read it, Dory. You know about, I think the chapter is called Pedal or Pedaling when Jay, that's a separate story. Okay, we may get to that. Anyway, it kept happening on the bike. So at some point when I'd collected enough of these moments, I was like, we should write a book about this. And that really meant that Jay should write a book, because I don't really like to write books. I love to edit, but I don't like to write books. So anyway, that's how we came to write this book. So Jay said yes. And from reading it or reading the intro, it really has both of our voices in it pretty strongly, but Jay is, in fact, the narrator.
And as I said, he actually reads the book on Audible so that you hear it. If you're listening to it, you hear it from his voice. And the parallels, it's just so interesting. I've never ridden on a tandem bike, although I am a bicycle rider. And now, with my husband and I both being much older and older than you guys, we have e-bikes. And I so resonated with so many aspects of the book. So tell us a little about, I know you in the past were a big bike rider, Jay, on single bikes, and you weren't so much, Szifra. And you mentioned that you started with the tandem on your 60th birthday. Were you riding some before then, or what motivated you to start riding and why?
So the last ride that I remember, there's two answers. The last real ride I remember was when I was 15 or 16, before my license, going from Lowell, Massachusetts to Chelmsford, Mass to a Dairy Queen with a friend. So I think that was my last bike ride, except for, I don't know, Jay, do you want to tell this story about the surprise for my 49th birthday, the year we met?
Yeah, Szifra puts quite a premium on birthdays and having something special on birthdays. And so she mentioned at some point that she might like to try a tandem at some point. And I found a place that rented a tandem and brought a pretty clunky tandem to her house as a, quote, birthday present. And we were going to take a ride around the neighborhood. I had been riding bikes a fair amount. People who really are hardcore bikers at that point would not have said I was a hardcore biker, but I rode a fair amount. And so we planned to ride around the neighborhood. And of course, as happens to all good things, it started to drizzle and rain, and
it was warm rain because my birthday is in June. Jay and I had met 3 months prior, and when he walked in with this tandem bike, it was a total sweet surprise. I do like to do special things, and Jay's right, but the special thing could be literally like I'll go take a city bus because I've never done or hadn't done that in 30 years. So it doesn't have to be extravagant. So this was a pretty interesting thing. So we rode for a half hour on this tandem and then checked that box. And that was the end of that until Jay started riding a single bike much more seriously. And after some years of that, I thought it'd be fun to do something like this together. Jay was looking for a joint activity that was physical. And I said, what do you think? Should we look at getting a tandem bike?
So it might be important at this point to know that Szifra, in a certain way, is much more independent-minded than I am. And she was pretty content with us having lots of independent activities. And I thought just eating dinner together wasn't quite enough for me.
It is true that a little relationship goes a longer way for me than for Jay.
Are you calling this a little relationship?
So, you've been together how long now?
25 years.
Yeah. I just wanted to put that out there.
This one looks like it has staying power.
When she says this one, I don't know if people listening to this will know this without us saying it, but we've been in relationships and serious relationships and, even married before.
A few times, right? Yeah.
So, yeah.
5 between us before we met.
It takes a lot of practice to do it well.
Both with bicycles as well as the relationships. And I know that, you talk a lot about, and it's true, that the older we are, the more baggage we have. And part of the beauty of the book is the honesty that you share, both in terms of the baggage you each have had and how it impacts, and your willingness to talk about and process and finding the right balance, processing and being and living and not getting stuck so much in the weeds. But I'm just trying to decide let's maybe talk a bit more of the relationship background and then how, if that's okay with the two of you, because it's such an important part, I think, of the book, and then how the tandem riding has flushed it out. And as you say, the negotiating speed bumps and dealing with the ups and downs and all of that. So maybe just share some of that background of how you met and some of the baggage that you've had to deal with and have contended with during this 25 years together?
Be glad to. And therein lies one of the questions we had, or I had in writing this book, was that I'm pretty irreverent and don't sometimes treat things that other people might find as triggers or as really serious. I don't tend to treat them too heavily, even though I feel a lot and appreciate when people also have struggles. But so as I talk about this, I suppose that there's some kind of trigger warning that should be out there, because some people have been divorced, have a very difficult time, and people have lost partners, and I'm irreverent. So I've been married. This is my fourth marriage. And when we were talking about getting married, I said to Szifra, would you like to get married? And she said, I'm not sure I want to be your fourth wife. And I said, I'd be your third husband. And Szifra said, that's completely different.
Was I qualified because I had a death as opposed to 2 divorces? So I made that, I justified something in my head about, 3 divorces was really different from 1 divorce and a death.
And of course, I came up with, but I probably have to sleep with one eye open, because at that point, both her husbands had died. So that's the irreverent part there. But I was married at 19, and it went through a series of relationships, always very serious about them, nothing casual, and I kept expecting that somehow people would get easier. I worked on myself, but I felt like that was only part of the equation. They, quote, had to do something. It took me a long time to understand that me doing something was not only important, it was the primary thing.
Yeah, you have a notion that, I don't remember if we put this in the book or not, about 100% responsibility. Do you remember, Dory? It's funny, I don't remember that piece.
So the piece people who care what that means is, 100% responsibility means stop trying to put something off on somebody else, figure your way to deal with it, or if you can't deal with it, take responsibility for not dealing with it and figure out what that means in terms of relationship. So, yeah.
And Jay, in both fairness to you and accolades to you, you have that notion really solidly for yourself, which helped me create for myself too. I say I created it. I eventually owned it or took it. But
so there's hope.
There is hope that I could.
You might start to practice it.
I could keep growing, honey. Yeah. So the idea that each partner owns 100% is just really interesting. And Jay is still with those things. So I'm in a relationship with someone who really loves the challenge of improving and tweaking and fine tuning most of the things in life. So that's on the bike as well as in every communication. So it's been interesting.
And that's one of the places where bike language has been helpful to my head, because in athletics or in bikes, it's talked about as marginal gains. What are the very small things you can do that will give you a gain? And don't ignore it just because it's a small thing. So
that's interesting. Yeah. This is a little off track, but it's both serious and funny. There are 2 parts. One is today is the 7th anniversary of a really bad bike accident Jay and I had, and an accident in which Jay was concussed for 4 minutes. So it was a really bad one. And I wanted to stop riding after that because the cost benefit ratio didn't seem worth it to me. We had many months of discussions about it, including some EMDR therapy for me, which was really valuable, by the way. And we've been back on the bike for thousands of miles since that 2017 accident. And since then, though, in speaking of gets to be the funny part, the marginal gains thing, I wanted to put a flag on the bike because I just kept thinking we were in bright clothes, we had light. The police officers who usually go with the driver said, how could anybody have missed you, how bright you were, all that stuff. So I thought, what else could we do? We could get a flag. Jay was like, we can't really ride with a flag because that will slow down the output.
The aerodynamic.
So I started putting flags on my clothing, these little things. So I called watts are what you generate, the power you generate on the bike. And the older you get, the harder it is to generate as many watts as younger folks or stronger folks riding with you. So I call them watt wasters. So if somebody were to see me on a bike, they would see all these waving colors, which is not a marginal gain, it's a marginal loss in terms of the aerodynamics, but it's a marginal gain for my head and allows me to think they're seeing movement and color, so it protects us a little more. So anyway, there's a lot to say about marginal gains.
And I do want to say that since Szifra has put those on, she actually, I think, takes a little bit more responsibility for trying to up her output.
So that's actually true. That's true.
She used to be putting in 38 to 39% of the total power that we could generate together. And this year she's in the 42 and 43%. So yay.
And the only reason we know that is because after years, and the book does talk about this, how resistant I was to measuring anything, my heart rate, my wattage, output, anything. I did not want to be a person who was doing that. I never had been in my life enjoying things like that. And at some point, there were reasons, again, it's a longer story, but I started doing that. So once I started collecting this information, I got curious about, so what percentage of the total am I actually putting in? And when I started calculating it, I was surprised initially how little it was, because I thought I was working, but the numbers showed me in a more objective way, oh, you push harder on the pedal and the number gets bigger. And so now after each ride that we do this way, I'm like, okay, so what was your normalized power, Jay? And then I strut around if mine was over 40%.
So it's also made interesting to know that Szifra said she was not into collecting data. But you do remember she's the one that said, but I'd be your fourth one.
That's true.
I can see that data.
I think we'll shift back to some of the relationship part, but I think it would be helpful for the listeners to hear a little about how some of the decisions in the bicycling, because as you said just a little bit earlier, Jay, that both of you are just free spirit. You're independent, and this is something that you're doing together. And in general, one or the other has to be the captain and the other the stoker, the person in the back. And it is interesting. I learned so much about tandem in the book that I've not been aware of, that often it's males that are the captains and women the stoker. And so again, it's part of the metaphor of how you negotiate the relationship, but that sense of both shared responsibility, but you being in front and you being in back. Can you talk some about how that's impacted both the bicycling, but also your relationship?
Yeah, it was an interesting struggle for me. I was the stronger bicyclist, and the person who's heavier can affect the way the bike goes is directed by leaning. And so generally the heavier, more experienced person would end up on the front. But then historically, of course, tandems have been around for a long time, and there would be very few men who would be tolerant of having a woman on the front of the tandem in the late 1800s, probably. So things have changed. It felt like we were trapped by physics. And then the more that we were around tandem people, the more we discovered that there certainly are an awful lot of mixes to that, including their tandeming. Let me back up here a second. Being a stoker, and you don't have to see where you're going. And so people who are sight impaired or blind, riding on the back of the tandem gives them a chance to be out in the air and exercising and really being a part of a community. And so in those cases, there are any number of women who are the captains and husbands who are the stokers. And that also goes for people with Parkinson's. Many Parkinson's people find that they can hold the symptoms off for a while longer if they're out doing regular bicycling, and having the pedals turn under their feet causes them apparently to then get into the rhythm and be able to push in a different way. So those are all there. And then we have a couple that we ride with who are essentially the same size. And so their tandem, our tandem had to be built two different sizes, front and back. So it's hard for us to even try to switch. But this couple is the same size, and they literally ride the ride or during the ride and switch off between captain and stoker. So it's not a lock-in at all. So.
Yeah. So on the mechanicals, yeah, Jay's Jason, we're starting to see more females as the captains, even on our rides, which is very exciting to be able to see that. I honestly would not have wanted to captain. Some people might. I would not have wanted the job that the person in front has to do. As a cyclist story, how much you have to be paying attention on the single bike. Every impediment in the road is potentially, like on the road, both literally like the stones or the squirrels running past or the potholes or whatever.
Potholes. Yeah.
All of those things are potentially a place to get thrown off your bike. So you're needing to watch for that as well as for traffic and braking and shifting. And I knew I would be better as the auxiliary engine because I like to push and I'm willing to work. I do more on the tandem. That's probably true in our relationship too. We equalize things where we can. So on the bike, a lot of the people we know, the captain does 98% or 90, I don't know, maybe that's an exaggeration. Let's say 80% of the actual stuff. The stoker usually does the navigation if you're on an unfamiliar route and kind of does a report of what's happening around in a kind of fun way that the captain can't be looking at because they're looking for safety issues. Jay and I made the decision early on. Really, I think probably you deserve the credit for this more, Jay, of thinking about how to involve me early on. And so do you want to talk about looking left and looking right? Because you might be clear.
Yeah, so we come to an intersection. There's a time delay in turning your head from left to right. And so Szifra looks one direction, and usually it's to the right because the left lane is likely to be closest to us if we're crossing a street. And Szifra tends to keep an eye back and tell me when there's a car approaching. And she signals right or left turns. I have to sometimes augment that because people may think that they're two bikes when they're head on to us. And so I signal in from the front sometimes so that they know, yes, they're two bikes, I suppose, but I'm turning in the same way the bike behind me is turning, if it were. And she will signal sometimes there's a pothole. We simply have to come out towards the lane where there maybe is a car too close to us for that to be the comfortable thing. And I will say to Szifra, I have to come out, and she will signal in such a way that the driver knows, we're coming out. This is not sometimes, this is a do it now. So there are lots of things like that where we go back and forth.
Yeah, I feel like I do. I'm not just pedaling when I'm on the back of the bike. I feel like I'm watching back. I'm doing all the things Jay talked about. And it's not that I never can look around, just like when you're riding on the front. But I think we've done a reasonable job of allocating responsibilities that make sense for the position. And I don't think I'd ever thought of this before this moment. But Jay, I think that's probably what we do in our relationship as well, as we play to our strengths. There are things that come easily to you, and I'm more likely to come to you and say, will you tell me how you would craft this? How would you organize this information? Or you might have me make phone calls, right? There are just a whole bunch of...
Szifra's an extrovert, and at best I could be called a flextrovert. And so
I love that's part. Flextrovert.
That's where part of that comes from. But yeah, and I think why Szifra suggested that the book would be an interesting idea and then suggested that I write it.
Exactly. Right. And that you'll edit it. But it's... Go ahead, Dorian. No, you go. No, you go ahead. Okay. Well, I was thinking even that there's the writing, the editing, and with a book, there's promoting the book. And frankly, that would we would not be talking with you if Jay were in any way in charge of book promotion, because it's just not where your interest or energy is. There are a whole bunch of those things, whether it's our dog or it's our interaction. Jay's more likely to address a gap than I am in the connection, and I'm more likely to nudge him about getting certain things done, or I don't know, But it's interesting to realize we do that on the bike as well. And trying to divide the 100% of life's responsibilities in some way that is as easy as possible for the two of us on and off the bike.
Yeah. And I think in the book and with the chapters, you do such a beautiful way of using the metaphor and taking it back to the relationship. And I was really impressed. What I often do when I read books, I like to look at some of the reviews on Amazon. And there was one in particular, which is going to get us back a little bit more to the relationship part, that really struck me, because if we're thinking about building a new relationship at midlife, where we all have a past and we all have baggage and we all have losses that we've had to deal with, some more difficult than others. And this one kind of a review that I really loved, and this person said, what I didn't expect was something that is rarely talked about: how you navigate new relationships when a past relationship that has ended lives on in the mind or heart of one or both people, and how a gesture, a word, a situation, or anything else can unexpectedly set off emotional reactions related to that other person, and both people need to acknowledge it. Left unaddressed, it can harm or sabotage a relationship. And I resonated with that review that was written, because it is so true. And I just want to get back to the building of the relationship and the traumas, and how you even talk about it in the book, that how the bicycle accident, when you had a lot of trauma, can re-trigger trauma. Part of your having the EMDR, as you said, Szifra. But there's so many gems of this book, and how to integrate the loves and losses of the past. If you can talk about that, because you use this metaphor too, that sometimes it's the blended family, some alive, some not alive, and how sometimes it was a tandem of 3 or a tandem of 4. And in particular, your husband, who's not alive anymore, Szifra, has been a prominent theme of the book because of his presence. Can you talk about that? A long-winded question and comment, but I think it's such an important part. Yeah, go ahead.
And I do want to say that my irreverence, which may have been helpful in some ways, was tolerated by Szifra to an amazing degree. And I'm not sure that we would have been able to move through it as smoothly if she hadn't had a real desire to laugh at things and find lightness in the world. I just want to say that as a starting point.
Yeah, thanks. It was not always easy for me, both in terms of my late husband, but also in terms of Jade, who in the book is the third ex, his previous wife, who he's Jay.
My third ex.
Your third ex, yeah. It cracked me up when the way that Jay dealt with those two relationships. I'm going off track, but it is funny, like capitalizing him for my late husband and calling his third wife the third ex. And then, by the way, in the acknowledgments, Jay let her read the book, asked her to read the book, and she read it and said, no lawyer needed, but fine, no lawyer needed, which was very funny. They're still friends. So it wasn't always easy for me, though. I was jealous about Jay's relationship with her. Initially, it took me a long time to get comfortable. Jay was really great at making sure that he invited me to every single lunch, dinner, walk, whatever they were going to do. Judy and I are getting together. Do you want to come? And I did a time or two, and then I was done, and now I'm fine. And for Jay, I think Jay and I are together because of his maturity around this stuff. In the very first conversation we had on the phone, a friend introduced us, a mutual friend. Jay was coaching her. She was a friend of mine and someone Jay was coaching. And she asked if Jay wanted to meet a friend, and that's yet a whole different story. Anyway, when Jay and I had that first phone call, actually it might have been the second, I don't know, but in it, I was trying to figure out how to let Jay know that I was, in my mind, still recently widowed. And it had been, I think, 20 months, something like that. And I kept hinting around and saying these things. And Jay's response, which I'd never thought of before, was, Schiffer, you're going to need to have someone who is able to have a third presence in your relationship for the relationship to work. And I thought, wow, he's right. And who says that? What man am I going to find in the world who in my first conversation or second conversation with him is going to say something as astute and as emotional, as connecting as that? I think I better pay attention to this guy. Yeah. And that's who Jay is. And I don't know if I'm answering your question. I feel like I've taken us somewhere. Help me, Dory.
No, I think that, and maybe Jay can expand on it. And I know you talk in the book about how hard it was to really talk about your husband's death, and the way that, just as that wonderful kind of review in Amazon said, just the little triggers that you had that you shared. It was hard for you to share how he died and what that's been like and what it's been like for your kids. And so if you can share a little of that, I don't want to give away the whole book, but
Okay. That's what I'm trying to decide myself. Is this a kind of thing that is a plus? I'm fine to talk about it. So if you think it's a plus for us just to be out there, I'm fine with that.
yeah, I think it is because it's tied in.
Okay.
So Janice from Illinois, I'll just integrate her question. It makes me think it would
Okay.
be good. She says, you have a great book title. How do you cover the tough topic of grieving in midlife? I found in my family therapy private practice that many in midlife are experiencing many losses and are thrown off course with their grieving. Our culture's not well educated on grieving, and yet it's such a key top in midlife to have to deal with. So that's why I think maybe talking about a few of the specifics and how, how he's been part of the relationship in some ways, and how you've needed to navigate and negotiate, how you, Jay, maybe in part two, have needed to navigate and negotiate how somebody can still be alive in somebody's heart, and how the grieving can trigger things, and I think your humor and you just have this lovely capacity to hit it straight on, but then also make room for it.
Yeah, and as you can imagine, and it's anybody who's had trauma in their life can imagine, there's a delicate balance, and I often felt like I had stepped over the line, but I was also open to Schiffer saying, "Yeah, that's too much." So her late husband died by suicide, and I think that's an important thing to say.
And I'm open to talking about that. So it's good you mentioned it, and I would have been comfortable as well.
Yeah, and Schiffer said it early in our meeting each other, and I think that it became important for me to not act like that was any kind of a taboo subject. So I had to take the risk of pushing it to become normalized, and Schiffer had to take the risk that I was going to bring it up, and she did a great job of not putting the damper on my bringing it up, and it became fairly quickly something that was just a part of our relationship. And so, in a sense, I took some ownership, and that helped me to feel comfortable. It wasn't like Schiffer had the secret with her previous husband and I shouldn't go there. It was like Schiffer and I as a couple had this other experience that I wasn't there at the time, but that I was, in a sense, involved in. And it gave me some permission around her sons and her friends. So it isn't a thorough answer because it takes a lot of the book to be thorough about how we negotiated all the little things. But
And
yeah.
there were some tricky things. Like I lived in Chelmsford, Mass, in a relatively small town, and when Jay would come to visit, for the first many months, I wasn't comfortable holding his hand there. Whereas when we were in Medford, where Jay lived, it was fine because I had this notion that it wasn't respectful or so early, and other people were like, "Schiffer, it's not so early." And then there are a lot of triggers that come up where you're reminded something happens and you're reminded in some way of the person who died. And as anyone who's been widowed or has had a similar kind of loss, is because the person dies doesn't mean the relationship ends. The person isn't here, but you're still in the relationship with them. And it takes a while before anything from the sense of guilt, which logically makes no sense because they're not alive, but inside it still feels like you're married or loyal or connected or something. So there are just all these feelings that come up. And do you share them with your current partner? Do I tell Jay? Do I not tell Jay? And Jay, you said it beautifully, Dory, when you said that Jay, I think you said can hit it straight on, and make room. Jay's really good at making room for emotional things. And I would encourage the listeners to think about ways they might find opportunities to make room for things that you think are taboo.
And I would have said beyond making room, I think part of my strategy, and I mean that in the best sense of the word, was we have to normalize this. And I don't mean that the action should be normalized, but the feelings and the fact that occurred there's no secret here. There's no shame here. There's no guilt here. This is just what happened. You bought the car you drive.
You got brown eyes.
And if the car has a flat tire, you don't blame yourself. You got that husband, and if that husband doesn't work out, you don't blame yourself. The bigger issue I found was that Szifra was struggling, and it was easy for her to feel some guilt jealousy. And I had to be able to say, I'm open to having him in the relationship, and her kids be maybe a little resentful of me for being there without him. But I also have to then also take her jealousy and not let it get me carried away or play a game of evensies or anything else. It's just that's the way our life is. If I want to be here, this is what has to happen. And Szifra made it worth being there.
Oh. That's the beauty of this book. And again, the metaphor. Relationships at any age are hard or can be, and are just to develop them and maintain them. But I do think the older we get and when there are these different traumas, and you talk in the two of the trauma of your family and the Holocaust, Szifra, and trauma gets handed down. But then when there's this immediate trauma of, particularly when somebody dies, whether it be by suicide or illness, and just that comment that a person can die, but the relationship still lives on. And how do we negotiate it? Like I always say, the affirmation of love is that you can love again and not have to allow yourself to die in the process. And that your book really speaks to that, but how hard you both work to make that happen and to know he's still alive in you and needing to honor that, but not let it take over in a sense.
Yeah. I think that's what we also, we got a lot of therapy during that time, a lot of couples therapy / coaching, not just that time, actually. I think I was in individual counseling at that point myself because I was so nervous about making another quote bad choice, even though Jay's good about these were just, I forget, you have a way of talking about it, Jay, that I'm now forgetting about. They would just practice for us being together now or some sweet optimistic thing. And for me, they were like, I don't want to have a third husband. That was like a bad choice.
So what should I say about the 4? I think that I said, it took me more practice than it did you.
Yeah, something. I don't know. So we had significant outside support to keep looking at these issues, helping to create an environment that facilitated the conversations when they got jammed up. So, yeah. Dora, you asked about how I'm aware somehow of the time, and you asked about the bike, and I'm happy to keep talking about that. Do you want us to talk about how the bike might have been helpful or?
Yeah, I was just going to get into that, but let me just integrate. Zernal from Hammond says, I absolutely love you two. I think I'm going to start referring to myself as a flexovert. Thank you, Jay. I came across your book while driving on the Indiana toll road, and I just wanted to share that. But yes, I was about to say, yeah. Go ahead.
Since Zernial is listening, most people know him as D, so we actually have a connection and a relationship now. So when you think about, you write a book, and you have no idea what doors are going to open, and one of the coolest doors that opened is Zernial Shackelford Jr., who is on the board at an organization. Ooh, Zernial, you might have to text it in. Maybe it's called Challenge Unlimited? Ooh, I forget. It's an organization in Chicago that does it helps people, like Jay was mentioning before, of all sorts of disabilities. And one of them is tandem biking. So Zernial saw a decal on our van and reached out. And so anyway.
Well, that's wonderful to hear. Yeah, maybe he will, if he's not driving now or can't talk and text, maybe he'll say what.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wanted to come back to like what role did finding the tandem biking, how did that help? And it may be that people aren't necessarily able to do tandem biking, but we can draw from that of kind of ways that people can come together, and it's part of the resilience, I think. But yeah, so talk about what you've learned since you started the bike together and how it helped.
I think that the why we got into tandem is in part that if you haven't known so far, we are very different, and we had very active lives apart from each other. And one of the questions was, what could we do that would be a joint project that we could both be invested in? And Szifra didn't want to go failing, and I wasn't interested in I forget what it was, yoga or Zumba or whatever. So we struggled some, and we said maybe the tandem is a way to go. So that's how that came up. But it was trying to find something that we both could do that was likely to bring us together, not separate us. And one of the things about tandem biking that we didn't know at the time, people say that whatever problems you have in your relationship, the tandem bike just makes them worse. I can't remember how.
And whatever direction your relationship is going, the tandem will get you there faster.
and so if
the good, bad, and the ugly, huh?
Yeah. And if after a short period of time we were still together, we thought, oh, maybe this will work. But Szifra was really encouraging about us sticking with it, even though for her it was a newer kind of thing to be riding a bike. So that was interesting. And then we started to, in the winter, go someplace that was warm and be able to ride. And that was also an interesting thing to have.
Yeah. And adding to what you're saying, the tandem requires more communication and coordination in real time in order to both make the bike go and primarily to make the bike go safely. So I need to report to Jay when I'm going to go reach for the water bottle because I'm going to shift the balance of the bike. And if he doesn't know that, then he has to wonder what's happening. And we don't want his amygdala or limbic system to be activated. We want his neocortex and eyes focused where they need to be. So there's all these moments on the bike and vice versa where we need to be very specific. That's one way in which I think we've increased our ability to communicate. Another is that, you know how in relationships you want to be heard and you want to be heard first and you want to be right. And in moments of stress, those things get intensified, right?
And that's the worst possible time sometimes. Yeah.
Absolutely. On the bike, it is the worst possible because for the same reasons. You want both people thinking as well as they can be thinking, looking at what they need to be looking at and focused on the 2,000-pound predators who might take a right or a left turn and really hurt you, and the squirrels and the everything else on the road. So we had an incident, actually, this one is in the book. We had an incident where Jay was pushy, forceful, I would say, telling me something to do that, like pedal, and in that tone, or at least that's how I heard the tone. And I thought we should stop. And we each couldn't see what the other was seeing, which is, of course, metaphorical for any part of a communication. And we had one of the most intense, I don't know, most intense friction on that particular ride, on that part of the ride.
You're going to ruin the image of us as like this warm, loving, sweet couple.
I am. I'm just painting a little tiny dark spot on this beautiful painting. But I'm going to cover it over with yellow soon, so it'll all be bright. Later, I started realizing that I could really gain some skill off the bike if I practiced off the bike, not having to be right or first or heard right then. And I really did work at this the way somebody might work at, I don't know, learning an instrument or getting faster on the bike or whatever they were learning, pickleball skill. I really practiced it. So now, when there's a moment like that, I have much better ability to just breathe. Even though I still have the same urges, I have an internal brake that says, safety first, you'll figure this out later. So I think that's the biggest one for me, Dory, the biggest piece of learning that would not have happened without the tandem.
Great. And you also, it sounds like, are part of a whole new community. Can you talk a little about the tandem community? And I do want to say that Zernal did say it's called envisionunlimited.org.
Envision Unlimited.
ENVISION Unlimited. So envisionunlimited.org is the organization that, just wanted to add that.
Thank you.
Yep. But Jay, go ahead.
I do want to say that my abrupt demand that Szifra pedaled was also, she looks around or saw what it was that I thought was a danger to us and recognized that. And that's part of why she was able to cut back, because she cares about staying safe. I can be a jerk, but in that particular moment, I wasn't just a jerk without reason.
No, it was really an attempt. Jay could see traffic that I couldn't see. And yeah.
And it sounds like it's a great community. Let me just make one more comment before community, that it does push that communication part and the importance that you just had mentioned, Szifra, of taking it to just regular life. And you think about what you said earlier about each person taking 100% responsibility. It's like needing to step back and say, what did I bring to that? Not what did this other person do to me, but what did I bring to that? And it sounds like that's part of the wonderful kind of learning and communication that I'm hearing from it and that I got from reading the book too. But back to community now, unless you want to comment on that.
No, there's a really wonderful tandem community in our area here. We're pleased at how little stress and argument and struggle is obvious most of the time. And people say that if you own a tandem bike, essentially you're going to sell it while it's virtually brand new, or you're going to have thousands of hours on it, because pretty quickly you learn whether you as a couple can manage that. And there's just a lot of kind of fun, interesting people. And I'll give Szifra full credit for developing that part of our life, because I like the people. I'm glad to be there, but she's the one that I think her personality is attractive for other people to be around.
Thanks. And I have more motivation for that kind of thing. So it turns out that there are tandem groups all over the country and all over the world. And we're part of a group called the New England Wicked Tandem Society. And it's been really fun. And there are these rallies once a year, again, all over the country. We have the Eastern Tandem Rally. Next year, it's actually going to be in Devons, Mass., which is nice because it goes all the way to the Eastern Seaboard. It could be anywhere. And there are even tandem bike tour groups. And the two people who are doing that tandem group, that Eastern Tandem Rally, are Mike and Karen Bianco, who owned adventures in tandem. That is something they started after they left their corporate jobs. So it's pretty fun. 150 tandem bikes, tandem teams get together and do all these activities and rides based on your strengths and your hardiness. So it could be a 20-mile ride and it could be a 60-mile ride. And it could be moderate elevation or it could be really hard. And we have the same in Tucson now in the winter. There are huge numbers of tandems, Tucson tandems, Oro Valley tandems. And yeah, so it's been a kick. And as Jay said, people who ride tandem tend to be more amiable as couples. They may not individually be, but as couples because they can ride a tandem.
Yeah, that's great. Two things. One, Jay, what was it like for you to record the book? And then I have another question. But what was it like to do that? Yeah.
I would start by saying it was completely different than I thought. I had acted in high school and I was somebody who felt comfortable reading and I had written the book. And so I ended up in a professional studio to have it recorded. And it was brutal. Stop. Let's try this again. Let's try that paragraph. Let's do this. My voice gets sore. Okay. We've been at this for 2 hours. Let's do more another time. Wow. What a lot of work. And it was amazing at the end to hear just how seamlessly the sound recording engineer had cut out all the bad parts, put in the new parts. It was quite a project. I'm impressed with voice actors, and I suppose I would do it again, but I'm certainly not eager.
That is interesting to hear. Just comment that Zernu has a copy of your book, so he will not get another copy. But Janice, do let me know your address, and you will get a copy. Szifra, did you listen at all during the recording, or was this just his thing and you were separate?
No, I did. I did listen to each piece as it was recorded. The recording engineer would send it to me, send me the clips, and I got to listen. And I got to hear Jay talk about what it was like each time he came back from the studio. At one point, his cousin, who is production manager, I think, for really famous musicians, including Bruce Springsteen and who he's traveling with, I think, right now, that kind of thing. He's really well known for what he does. I was telling him about it and at his house, and he pulled out this tea and said, "Oh, this is what the singers use." And it was like some throat-soothing tea. So we had vargle, we had tea, we had lozenges, we had all these things we didn't know about. So yeah, it was quite a thing.
Yeah, you did a really good job. Sounds like it was not so easy, but you did a really great job.
I thought Jay was so the right person. Can I go back for one thing? I know we're over time, but I was just thinking about the question that you asked about, and the person we're going to get the opportunity to give the book to is a therapist. And I hadn't thought about who was the audience for this book in the way that it has transpired since the book's been out. And therapists are referring this book to couples because of just the stuff we've been talking about. There's often a partner who's not as oriented to emotionally processing. We'll agree sometimes, yeah. And nobody who knows me well would say that. Jay's just a champ. And there's so much bike mechanicals. As you read, Dorian, the book, he said you learned a lot about tandems and cycling, whatever. So there's one story that maybe exemplifies this. At a reading Jay and I did, there was an engineer and a therapist who decided to tell us something. And the engineer, who was the man of the couple, said, "I read your book and I wanted you to know when you were talking about all this stuff about the people, you and your feelings and the relationship, I just never knew where is he going with this? But I would slog through it to get to the bike part." And then his wife, who is a therapist, said, "And when I was reading that bike stuff, I was like, why do I have to read more about brakes and lubrication and shifters? And I don't care about that. But I couldn't wait to get to the relationship part." And then they looked at each other, and the man said to his wife, "In the 40 years we've been married, I think we had more conversations of the kind that you like than we've ever had before. And she said, we have, honey. So that really exemplifies, I think, a reason to have this book in the hands of therapists and the people who might not be going to therapy but might gain from this. And some people are listening to it together, which is another way to free therapy, low-cost therapy.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. And I do think, as I said earlier, that it's wonderful for midlife because of some of the issues of the added baggage we have as we get older. But I do think it's helpful always at the early parts of relationships too, because it's how do you negotiate things? How do you hold on to an I and be part of a we? That is an important part, and nurture the we without losing yourself. So it's both directions of it. So any other life lessons that either or both of you have learned since riding the bike together, or takeaways you want people to have? Go ahead, Jay. You started to say something.
Yeah, I do. I'm sorry. I had COVID a couple of years ago, and stuff that's in my head sometimes goes out and doesn't come back very quickly. So I'm going to let that one go.
So, but it may come back while we're still on. Yeah, but life
interrupt. Believe me.
Yeah, I would say.
Oh, I know what it was.
Good.
Go ahead.
That relationships are so different. My first marriage, I was 19. They're so different through the years, and because of who we are and what we bring to the relationship, and just how important it is for people to find ways to grow in the relationship they're in. I don't think you need to go through 4 relationships like I did, but to grow in the relationship you're in and assume that you two will be different. And sometimes that means the other person comes with, quote, baggage experience. This is what I would call it, that you weren't expecting. I didn't expect to have somebody come into my life who I needed to begin to figure out. She had Holocaust parents. What's that mean? She had a death of a husband. What's that mean? Those were new things to me, but I was ready for her to come into my life with her history, and not, I want her to come into my life and be some image of something that I had dreamed of, which at 19 was what broke up that marriage. Me.
So beautifully put. Yeah, that's beautifully put. Yeah. Accepting the whole person as we get older. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. It's nice to live with someone who has both the emotional maturity Jay has and the eloquence. I get to hear these it was really lovely, Jay. I agree with Dory.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I think, Dory, is your question about what life lessons have we learned in part because of the bike, or just in general being people who've lived now these decades of life, or both?
Probably both. Big question. I know.
Well,
if it makes it easier to narrow it down, it's fine. If it's been since riding the bike together, or
I wouldn't
developing this now. No.
Yeah. Okay. So for me, I think there's been a deepening of the kind of trust I have in Jay. There's something pretty powerful about getting on the back of a bike and knowing you're entrusting your safety to the person who's in front, seeing what they're seeing. I suppose really we do that every time we get in the car with someone, but we don't think about that. The car has this feeling and illusion of safety because you've got all this metal around you. When you're out on the bike, I don't know, would you say that you feel more vulnerable, Dory, out on the bike than in the car?
Oh, I think absolutely. And there's an added part, I should say, that it's the trust, but also the control stuff. Both of you talk about using the bike shoes that clip in. To be honest, I'm not comfortable with that because I don't want to, even though I'm sure you can get out of them really quickly. But to me, that feels like a compromise of control that I'm not comfortable with. I want to be able to know I can move my foot, my foot quickly. So it's very much the deepening of trust and the giving up. It's the trust, but giving up some control that the person in front is more the eyes and you're you're trusting. I'm just,
And yeah,
go ahead.
Sorry, I'd love to put you on the front of a tandem and have you in full control and have Szifra on the back and lean to look behind her and have the whole bike start to swerve into the travel lane.
yeah.
Right. That would be a challenge.
Her control over the bike is staggering sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, you don't realize as the quote backseat driver how little it takes for Jay to suddenly have to hold on and what do you call it, counterbalance the shift that the lean that I just created. So he has trust in a whole different way that I'm going to communicate well and not do something dumb.
And the other thing I'd like to say is that I really understand the shoes issue, and because you have a way that you have to twist your foot to get them out. And we just sit there and practice with new shoes or new cleats until we go, okay, that's kind of going to be second nature. And suddenly it is. So that's all the other things that you need to practice.
Yeah, it did take me a while, and I don't know. Yeah, I understand, Dorian. I'd say trust your instinct on that.
But the other part too, that makes a lot of sense. And just thinking, we could go on for hours and we can't. But even the impact of the bike accident and having lost somebody before, and Jay's promised you, I'm going to outlive you, and then to be in these bike accidents, it is a lot of trust and a lot of looking out for each other to the best we can, but knowing we can't control it all.
Yeah, Jay mentioned his long COVID. It's really in many ways, at different times, I have a different husband. And this is another area, I guess it's like the suicide, where Jay and I talk more openly about this to each other and to the world than a lot of people do. If I'll just take it here and Jay, butt in, wherever you want. But this is all cognitive for Jay. And after this 2 years or so, we've had lots of, I say we because it feels like a partnership. Jay's had serious neuropsych exams, so we know not Alzheimer's, not Parkinson's, not dementia, but there are times where it's indistinguishable. Jay will not be able to pull up words, won't be able to remember a neighbor. It's episodic. So Jay is one of those people who has historically carried maps in his brain just easily, which is the opposite of me. And those maps evaporate. Jay can literally sometimes not picture what street to turn on. When we came back from Tucson this year, do you want to say this or do you want me to?
Yeah, I could picture a house, but I had no idea what was at the end of our streets or how I would get to our house. Yeah.
Yeah, they didn't know what street to turn on. We'd lived here for 20 years. So, so there's things that are always shifting and changing. And So
they do. Oh, it is the fragility of life and the fullness of life. And I think the bike speaks to that too, of the trying to keep going forward and knowing when to brake or not, or fall off or not fall off literally, but lean to the left or lead to the right, and when you have to just literally fall off. I guess that's part of it too. But such important stuff that is in your book. I just want to thank you so much for being here today and just sharing honestly. And I totally recommend this book. It's so full and refreshing and honest. And I do think that it's a book for any of us. And also, I'm still working and being able to refer couples to it. And I think it's not just, as I said, not just couples in mid-age, but the important life lessons is, I think, what it comes down to. So thank you both for being who you are and writing this book and sharing it with us. And thank you, everybody, for being here and listening today.
And thank you for the invitation.
Yes, thank you, Dory. This was a really fun, interesting, and lovely time together. I was going to say interview, in conversation. Let's say conversation. Yeah. Well, thank you both.
You've been listening to Revolutionize Your Retirement Radio with Dr. Dorian Mintzer. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show, listen to past episodes, or download our free retirement transition guide, visit revolutionizeyourretirementradio.com.